We're going to be watching this video by Legendary Drops about how indie games are now the enemy of big studios and big gaming. Let's go ahead and start the video.
You're doing right now. I see what you're doing. I saw what you said. You should not stop celebrating the success of these 30-person studios that are doing more with 30 people than most video game studios can do with 600. No, instead, you need to panic. We all need to panic because the deprofessionalization of the games industry is on the horizon. At least that's what they're calling it. And that means that there are fewer roles in marketing, cultural consulting. Brace yourselves for this one. Less roles in middle management. Oh, God, the horror. So today we're going to be talking about how apparently it's a bad thing that more people are making games on their own because that means less opportunities for the real professionals. Oh, yeah, this is going to be good. Once success starts happening outside of the system, all of a sudden it's not about whether or not these games are good. No, it's about who's not getting paid to make them. Exactly. Accountability is a rare thing in the games industry. I've noticed that more times than not. And so many people want to shift the blame onto somebody else. They want to create an enemy out of thin air, or they want to appeal to empathy for job security. And now we need to be careful with how much we enjoy these indie games because it could hurt AAA. You need to put down that Expedition 33. You might poke somebody's eye out with that thing. But before that, in
every other industry, it is the consumer that dictates whether a product is sold. Businesses are not going to continue to produce products that people are not buying. It's supply and demand. It's simple economics. If indie developers are making the games that players want to play, want to buy, that's where the money is going to go. If you're spending way too much money on a AAA title to have it developed, pass on that price hike to the customer, and if the game isn't good, they're not going to do it. They're not going to buy it. They're not going to waste their money on it. With good games coming out from indie studios, we don't have to only go to them for a good experience with video games. We can get it other ways through indie developers. And now that indie developers are becoming more prevalent, it's easier for them to put out games using very powerful engines, games like Expedition 33.
Word from today's sponsor. If game publishers are willing to charge $80 for digital games that you don't actually own, track your behavior, and lock content behind online-only DRM, what do you think they are doing with your data? Yeah, that's why I use NordVPN, and you probably should too. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic, blocks trackers and malicious websites with its Threat Protection Pro, and it helps you stay private no matter where you are or what you're doing online. It's fast, reliable, and it doesn't log any of your activity, which is more than I can say for a lot of other companies on the internet these days. It also lets you access region-locked content from anywhere in the world, whether that's a documentary that's only available overseas, a site that's blocked on your network, or you're just trying to avoid price discrimination. NordVPN gives you the freedom to browse without borders or restrictions. Whether you're sick of targeted ads, censorship, or you just want to take back control of your digital life, NordVPN gives you the tools to do it. .com/LDrops, or click the link in the description or pin comment below to get a major discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 extra months for free. And if you find out that it's not for you, well, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. Indie games haven't just found success in recent years, they have dominated, not just as underdogs, but as some of the most beloved and talked about titles in the industry. And indie has become a bit of a spectrum. On one end, you have studios like Larian with Baldur's Gate 3, or Sandfall Interactive with Expedition 33, well-funded, still operating outside of the grip of traditional publishers. And on the other end, you have solo developers like Tyler with Schedule 1, or Local Thunk, the creator of Balatro. Completely different scales, but the same result: self-run, self-funded, and most importantly, unrestricted by AAA. As tools become more accessible and these games keep hitting both critically and commercially, more creators are jumping in. Some are seasoned veterans that are finally breaking free to go make something they actually want to. Others are just complete newcomers. But the point is, they're doing it, and they're doing it on their own, and that's where the friction starts. Because every new success story from the indie world exposes just how bloated and inefficient the traditional studio system has become. And for some people, that's a threat, especially if your whole job exists within a 500-person pipeline. These all-purpose developers are doing to AAA what YouTubers did to network television, what streamers did to cable news. They are proving that you don't need 10 departments and 1,000 employees to make something that people actually care about. And just like how content creators are often branded as unprofessional by legacy media, indie developers are now getting the same treatment from the AAA establishment. In an article written by Bryant Francis of GameDeveloper.com titled "The Deprofessionalization of Video Games" was on full display at PAX East. PAX East felt like a warning. Explosively successful games by solo devs and small teams are great, but it could lead to the death of vital specialists. He writes, at DICE and GDC this year, I heard talk of a trend in game development that sent a chill down my spine. Deprofessionalization, as A16Z marketing partner Ryan K. Rigney defines it, deprofessionalization is a phenomenon driven by the overperformance of older titles, particularly free-to-play live service games, large studios struggling to drive sales, and the outsized success of some solo developers and small teams.
The bottom line is that if large studios were making games people actually wanted to play, they would be driving sales. That's all there is to it.
To drive sales and the outsized success of some solo developers and small teams. These three forces, he argues, will combine to drive career professionals from the traditional professionalized side of the games industry. Some of these people will decide to go indie, he continues. Others will leave gaming altogether. And in between, there is a vast spectrum of irregular working arrangements available. Yeah, I'm going to have to stop you right there. The idea that indie success is driving career professionals out of the industry is such a warped take that it's almost impressive. Let's just ignore the last 5 years of layoffs, project cancellations, and ruthless studio consolidation, and instead blame the one guy who made a viral hit in his bedroom. That's the villain now? Major studios have been pushing these people out long before indie would even come into this conversation. Specialized talent wasn't being nurtured, it was being discarded. Projects were getting rebooted mid-development. QA is being outsourced, and artists are being chewed up and spat out like there were nothing more than replaceable assets. Indie success didn't create this brain drain. It gave people a reason to leave willingly or a place to go if they didn't. So if those same professionals now look at indie devs and think, yeah, I'd rather take the risk and make something real, that's not deprofessionalization, that is liberation. And honestly, that's a good thing. And this industry needs more of it.
Good way to
Because
put
the
it.
reality is the parts of this industry that this article feels are being threatened, the corporate monoliths like Activision, EA, Ubisoft, Epic, are the same companies that are responsible for most of what's broken right now. Bloated budgets, monetization first design, copycat games that are designed to mimic Fortnite or Call of Duty. If those studios are shedding talent, maybe that's because they've become the worst place to put it. And if those same professionals that are being kicked out of the industry go on to build the next Larian, the next Supergiant, or the next Sandfall Entertainment, that's not a loss. That's the start of something better. The writer goes on to say, wandering through these booths, I found a mix of truly excellent and inspiring games, but also found myself bubbling with frustration. Few developers on display were working with teams larger than 3 people. They talked about publishers wanting ever more expensive offerings as a part of their pitch deck. Short-term contractors seemed to be the best way to plug gaps. Why did it feel like so few proper businesses were fighting to get their games in front of players at PAX? Speaking with Rigney and other developers, I sense that deprofessionalization isn't just a catchy phrase to describe the demand side of economics in game industry hiring. It's a frustrating reality that may undervalue games from big and small teams alike. Rigney offered some extra nuance on his deprofessionalization theory in an email exchange we had before PAX. He predicted that marketing roles at studios would be the first on the chopping block, followed by roles that seem to be replaceable to management.
In a lot of the failures we've seen recently, I think that the studios themselves have done a bad job of giving other departments, other divisions, a good product to actually put out and to try to push to the public. But this would be one where they would cut back on, obviously, first of all. And I wonder what roles he's going to say are replaceable.
Even if they're not. I genuinely cannot believe that this article exists. The writer walks through PAX, sees a wave of exciting and inspiring indie games made by teams of 3 or fewer, and comes away frustrated. Why? Because there weren't enough proper businesses represented? What does that even mean? You just admitted that these indie teams are doing great work, but then you're upset because they're not expensive enough because the teams are so small? And then you go on to quote developers saying that publishers are demanding bigger budgets to take their pitches seriously. And somehow that isn't the problem. You don't see the connection. The developers at PAX didn't create the system, the publishers did. This entire bloated mess is a natural result of an industry obsessed with scale, overspending, and risk aversion. These indie devs are simply surviving despite it. But of course, now we arrive at the heart of the article, that scary word, deprofessionalization, and suddenly the tone shifts. The accomplishments of these studios gets brushed aside. Their success becomes a problem, not a triumph. Because, oh no, they shipped a game that people actually liked without a marketing team, or a Ludo narrative synergy specialist, or a lead experiential curator.
No. Wait.
Guys, I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it. One of the biggest issues in AAA development is bloat. Bloated teams, bloated budgets, bloated management structures where nobody knows what the person next to them actually...
It became completely unsustainable and out of control during COVID, where video game companies, just like the movie industry, for instance, saw a way to try to capitalize on the fact that people couldn't leave their homes. So they hired tons of people. Blizzard has a particular problem with this, where if they downsize a team or a product, Hearthstone, right? Their online card game. Instead of getting rid of those people, they move them to other teams, even if they don't have tool sets or skills that fit the positions they're being put in. That's the type of bloat we're dealing with inside these big companies. People who may not have a lot of experience in the job they're doing. It doesn't mean they can't end up doing it. You know, there's a lot of on-the-job learning. Normal companies don't operate like this, okay? If you put together a team for products or a customer, for instance, and all of a sudden you lose that customer, you don't keep those people on unless they're talented. Then you find a spot for them inside your company. You do not keep them out of obligation. If what they were hired to do is no longer there, you do not just find another position for them. You don't do that. But that is what the video game industry did. And this is just one of the glaring differences of how the video game industry views itself as opposed to every other commercially driven business out there right now.
It's rebalancing. This industry has been top heavy for too long, and that weight is finally starting to shift towards the people who actually build the damn thing. The article then pivots to acknowledge a different kind of success story, the creative renegades, the ones that are making weird, original, impossible to greenlight games that traditional publishers would have laughed out of the room. Rigney praises them, calling them out as this is the only creative industry on the planet where one person can make $100 million making something by themselves, which, yes, true, but the tone here still drips with discomfort, like it's a cool fluke and not something to build around. Now, to the author's credit, they go on to clarify that small teams aren't obligated to hire anyone. They are doing what they can with what they have, and better tools have made that possible. But here's where the framing starts to slide sideways. They say what feels wrong is that so few people benefit from this new status quo. Not that small teams are succeeding, but that too many people aren't a part of it. They then go back to Rigney and bring up a new example, Aaron Rutledge, former lead designer of League of Legends, Black Ops 4, and Apex Legends, now running a consultant firm called Area Denial, basically a hired gun. The writer admits that his career sounds romantic, but then calls this model a structure that celebrates the few over the many, one that elevates roles like design and programming while leaving out non-essential positions. What is this? How do you go from saying that this is the only creative industry on the planet where one person can make $100 million by themselves to immediately following that with what feels wrong about this is how so few people seem to benefit from this status quo? Do you hear yourself? This is the benefit. That is the shift. We are no longer living in an era where you need to get a green light from a publisher, sit in a cubicle farm for 6 years, and then get your name buried.
What they're saying is that there isn't a large pool of people draining all of those profits that got created by that game. There doesn't need to be. It's like they have this massive checklist of things they have to include in there. And it includes all sorts of things, that they want to have sustainability long-term because they've invested so much money. So it's got to have a live service facet to it in whatever way they can try to make that happen. Expedition 33. Everything about that game was centered around the player experience. The music was incredible. It's all put together so well that you just want to keep moving on in the story. That's the whole point. it seems like AAA studios now are of the mindset that they deserve and are entitled to us buying their game regardless of how good it is. That's the point of view they've had. Because we made it, you should buy it. And thank goodness that gamers have started to not just buy, and they're actually voting and speaking with their wallet, which is what they have to do about anything that you want to change inside the gaming industry and any business thing. Players not buying games like Dragon Age: The Veilguard. It was always missing something. It just didn't feel right. But yet we should have bought it based on the fact that they made it, or that it's from a certain series or franchise. No.
In credits under 5 layers of management. We are witnessing one of the most democratizing eras in video game development history, and somehow your takeaway is, but not everybody gets to enjoy the ride? Of course they don't, but that's always been the case. But now the door is actually open. Look at Path of Exile and Grinding Gear Games, a tiny studio in New Zealand that grew to a 200-person powerhouse that's working on 2 full-scale games. Look at Expedition 33, built by ex-Ubisoft developers, a composer that they found on SoundCloud, and Jennifer Svedberg Yen, a former private equity investor who...
Lead writer, this story is so good. 2 of the aspects about this game that people rave about the most, the writing, story, and the music, outside of the gaming industry itself,
just wrote what might be this year's game of the year. The indie boom is not excluding people. It is including people that AAA would have never hired in the first place. That old system kept the gates locked. This new era is tearing them down. What you're seeing isn't exclusion, it's a healing process, a long overdue correction of decades of bloat, overreach, and creative stagnation. I'm going to get some people that are going to disagree with me on this, and that's fine. I do not believe in supporting these bloated structures, systems, and bureaucracy more than anything else, all in the name of job preservation.
I totally agree. Absolutely 100% agree. Nobody deserves to have a job or the job they have. Nobody's entitled to their job. You keep your job by performing and doing it well, and as long as your job is needed. When your job isn't needed, you don't have a job. That's the way it should be.
I think that it is a pathetic narrative that is driven by people that resist progress. And in a lot of cases, because they don't want to adapt, they want to make it everybody else's problem. This is something that has happened since the dawn of industries in trade. Anytime there are changes in the market, anytime new technology is introduced, old jobs go out, new jobs come in, some jobs get displaced, and in some cases, like the video game industry, well, the industry gets decentralized. That's why we see a private equity investor starting to write for video games.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Media's gone through the exact same thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a guy that worked 8 years in construction that has no journalistic background whatsoever that's writing reviews for video games and writing video essays on YouTube. I think the real problem for these people, and what really scares them, is that average, everyday people are getting involved in these industries and in some cases getting rich because of it, and they don't like that.
Yep.
Freedom is scary. On top of that, these people do not have the credentials that they want. They didn't go to college for it. Sounds like a you problem, not a me problem.
That's right.
Let's be honest. This article, especially coming from the media's point of view, this is more about control. Indie games are harder to predict. They're harder to market. And for them specifically, it is much more difficult for them to monetize from the outside. Not for everybody else, but it definitely is for them. No more guaranteed preview cycles. No more demos behind closed doors. No more getting cozy with their PR team. No, you're on even footing with guys like me, and I bet that keeps you up at night.
Yep, absolutely.
But this argument is going to shift now. Now instead they want to talk about who does not benefit from going indie, because indie developers do not hire these specialists that only do one thing. And it's really funny because this feels like this is the only industry where doing more than one thing is a threat instead of just doing your job. The writer then goes on to say, my PAX trip validated my fear that 3 professions are especially vulnerable in this deprofessionalized world: artists, writers, and those working in game audio or music. These roles seemed vulnerable because on these small teams, they were roles that developers mentioned doing in some sort of shared or joint fashion. All 3 risk compartmentalization as asset creators, their work treated as products you can purchase off of a store shelf. The writer then expands on this fear by pointing to broader industry shifts. He argues that in-house art positions are disappearing as studios are increasingly outsourcing asset creation overseas to cut costs. This move, he suggests, is being reinforced by the rising use of AI-generated art, something he openly criticizes for its poor quality, but sees it gaining momentum anyway. In his view, the value of artists is being eroded not because their work is bad, but because it's now seen as something that can be cheaply replicated or bought off of a shelf. Even art directors, he noted, are surviving not on creative output, but on their ability to delegate. When it comes to narrative, the critique gets a little bit more personal. The writer cites industry layoffs, pointing out that writers made up the highest percentage of reported job losses in the last year. He attributes this to two diverging trends: the success of games that minimize storytelling altogether, and the increase in tendency for story-driven titles to be written by a select few, usually the creative director or maybe one or two trusted collaborators.
You can't have 20 different writers with their own freedom to write and say whatever in the hell they want without one person driving the vision. And nobody tells anybody no inside these gaming companies currently because they won't hurt feelings. They're afraid to do that. And the problem with that is that's why the narrative is such a pile of shit in all these AAA titles now, is because there's not a single person driving that narrative, taking what all these people submit into a story and making it work in a cohesive fashion. What he just said at the end is 1, 2, 3 people. That's how you get a concise, clear, and good story.
Fewer roles for dedicated narrative teams. He also then reflects on long-standing frustrations that writers face in game development, many of them brought in late, treated as an afterthought, or positioned in conflict with the broader design goals. Some studios have tried to bridge this gap by rebranding writers as narrative designers, combining them with implementation, but the implication, he argues, is clear. Being just a writer is no longer enough. As for music and sound design, his concerns are much more structural. Audio work, he says, is increasingly handled through asset libraries, with implementation often falling on the other team members. While some composers prefer the freedom to work across multiple projects, he sees this shift as another sign that audio professionals, like artists and writers, are being treated more like support staff than essential contributors. And there it is, the famous self.
I totally disagree with that. In the sense that we've seen two examples, okay? Perfect examples. Doom: The Dark Ages. Everyone said the Doom soundtrack is a perfect example of it doesn't hit the same, and people notice and know. They know, okay? And then when it hits and it's perfect at every step of the story, and it nails down the moments perfectly. That's Expedition 33. You know, the people don't downplay that soundtrack, and people don't downplay the bad aspect of Doom's new soundtrack either. It is important. It is valued when it's good.
Self-insert, the emotional reveal, and honestly, probably the real source of this article's frustration. It's kind of hilarious that they still can't see the correlation. Small teams prioritizing design and programming, and those are the games that are succeeding. I hate to be the one to say it, but artistic roles are less essential, at least at the start. If a game isn't fun, if it doesn't play well, it doesn't matter how pretty the lighting or how cinematic the game feels. Indie is thriving right now because it's the exact opposite of AAA. It's gameplay and performance first, everything else after. That's what players care about. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that there's no value in talented artists, musicians, or writers. Hell, they're some of the most celebrated people in the industry. There absolutely is value in them. But let's be real, those roles only exist because of programmers and designers. Without their core systems and mechanics, you're not making a game, you're making a slideshow with music. These creative roles, no matter how skilled, are built on top of a foundation that they didn't pour. They're contributors, not cornerstones. And those roles can only thrive if the studio is stable enough, profitable enough, and able to actually invest in things that aren't essential to core gameplay. What's wild to me is the complete lack of accountability here. This article paints it like it's some sort of injustice that small indie teams often share roles, where creative directors also write, animate, and score the game, where people that are rigging the characters are also building the gameplay systems that they move through. But that's not dysfunction, that's adaptability. That's what a generalist is. That's how most industries work outside of gaming. Hell, I would bet almost everybody that is watching this video right now does way more than their job title suggests. When I worked in construction, I was constantly operating outside of my role, handling HR things like hiring and firing, writing environmental reports, coordinating with government agencies, researching equipment, contacting suppliers, creating and fulfilling purchase orders, even learning to read P&IDs and mechanical drawings. I got more involved in the process because that's what my job required. That's what being useful meant. Wearing multiple hats isn't a threat to job security. It's a privilege. It's a responsibility. And in most industries, it's expected. Look at Ubisoft. They are.
Nobody in other industries have this expectation that no matter what is happening, that my job is safe because, I fulfill role A.
Are bloated with specialists right now, yet they are completely directionless. The first Assassin's Creed trilogy was made with around 150 developers. Now they have over 1,000 people working on a single entry, and every release gets further away from what made that series special. Guillaume Broche, Sandfall CEO, is also the creative director of Expedition 33. When that team started with just 8 people, they all had to become generalists, taking on roles that they had never done before just to make it work. And in some cases, they ended up excelling at things that they had never tried. And you know what? That made the game better. It made it cohesive because when people are designing systems that are also touching the visuals, the animation, the design, you start to get alignment. You get purpose. You don't get this Frankenstein project where nobody knows what somebody else is building or how this whole thing fits together. That's the real problem with over-specialization. It turns game development into a game of telephone. The longer the pipeline, the more distorted the message. What the designer envisioned at the very beginning gets twisted by the time it reaches the animators, then further when it gets to VFX, and it's lost entirely by the time marketing gets their hands on it. The more segmented the roles, the more disjointed the final product. Maybe the uncomfortable truth that this writer doesn't want to hear is that this industry was never meant to fully support specialists, or at least to the degree that they have been. Maybe it's time for more people to take on more roles because the industry got into this mess that they're in right now precisely because they put too much weight on how things look and not how they play. We've got studios that are dropping hundreds of millions of dollars on graphics and cinematics, but they can't even be bothered to optimize their games to run above 30 FPS. We've got devs spending 6 months on hair physics while the combat feels like it was designed by an intern. What does the animation budget matter if the story's a joke? What does a beautiful world mean if the systems inside of it are broken? Maybe people need to stop clinging to being in a specialized role and take a step back and ask how they are actually contributing to what matters most, whether these games are fun or not. So no, I do not buy into this narrative of deprofessionalization, not for a second. What we are seeing isn't the decay of the games industry, it is its next evolution in game development. And honestly, it's not even new. This is what the industry was born from. Small teams, self-starters, people that knew how to build the whole damn thing, not just a piece of it. Is a professional somebody that only knows how to do one job, or is it someone who understands the entire process and can bring something to life from start to finish?
If you understand how other systems in a game work, even if you don't do it, that goes leaps and bounds towards creating a complete, fun game.
Because I know which one I would hire. This whole conversation feels less like a warning and more like job preservation for the sake of job preservation. And look, I get it. Transitions are hard. Watching your field change around you is hard, but we're not entitled to the status quo. The reality is the industry is shifting. You have to shift with it. That's not cruelty. That's life.
Consumers don't care about the status quo. They don't care about what you have to go through at your job if you produce a product. They just want it and be able to buy it and to be able to buy it at a reasonable price. That's all they care about. They don't care about your personal plight, unfortunately. They don't.
Dust yourself off, learn something new, expand your role, and if you believe that your skill set is so valuable, then you need to go out there and prove it in more ways than one. Before every studio wanted to balloon to 20,000 employees, most of this work was contracted. Teams were leaner, production was tighter, and when one game had ended, well, those people then moved on. But over time, these companies got greedy. They scaled up their output. They held on to these massive headcounts, and instead of letting people go when one project ended, they slid them on to pre-production of the next project, over and over until the weight of this all collapsed. That is not Indie's fault. That is your leadership's fault. Indie is not a threat,
Absolutely.
It's the path forward. It's the path out. Unless you genuinely believe that your entire career hinges on someone else giving you a cubicle and a title, there is an opportunity for you out there. People are buying these games. They are selling, and they're not just passion projects anymore.
Nope.
Many of them are growing into sustainable, expanding studios with the resources to be able to hire new specialists when they scale. That's the natural cycle. That's how a new forest grows, not from keeping dead trees standing, but from planting new ones and giving them the space to rise. So if you're standing around waiting for AAA to save your job, I have bad news. They're not going to, but someone else might. Or hell, you might. You know, it's actually funny. The last time that I read an article from GameDeveloper.com, they had written an article that was called Yelling is Not Journalism by Brendan Sheffield. And that article was essentially saying that, you know, the whole Baldur's Gate 3 drama, when that was going on, was an opportunity to tell players why they get unfinished games and basically why we should be okay with it, and we need to be empathetic, and we need to buy microtransactions and DLCs, and how it's not the developer's fault. But the funny thing is, we're customers. We don't have to be empathetic. And this entire thing, yet again, reads like a cry for empathy. But empathy doesn't make better video games, and better video games need to be made for these companies to be able to make the money, to be able to keep these specialists employed. Jobs follow the money. So regardless of how necessary you think your job is or how much it needs to be protected, at the end of the day, we are the ones that decide what's necessary and what's not. Inflation keeps going up. The price or cost of living continues to increase. And now these game companies want to increase prices on video games. Players cannot gamble on $70 to $80 games. And those are the kind of games that these specialists are involved in. Why do you guys think that Doom the Dark Ages isn't doing well in sales? It's because the game does not deliver on the value of the price that it's being charged for.
Yeah, it doesn't.
But they have to charge that price. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to make the money back to be able to pay the specialists that they have working on the game. Industries and the world itself is constantly evolving, and you cannot believe that your job will be protected or that your job is somehow more valuable than others. I think that it is incredibly narcissistic for you to believe that the world needs to capitulate or protect you because you are only good at one thing or you only want to do one thing. You can do that. You can be that person. But if you're going to be that person, you have to live with the consequences of your lack of flexibility. If you do not bend, you break. And I think a lot of these folks are going to break. You are not going to get any pity from the average consumer. It's just not going to happen.
Nope.
Because we all know that if we say something like, that's not my job, that almost always leads to not having a job. And when it comes to writer, artist, or musician, these are things that in common society that we view as hobbies. And you guys have the opportunity. No, you guys have the privilege of making that your job. It is up to you to protect it, not the world. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to share the video with your friends. Make sure to like the video, share the video. I already said share. Subscribe to the channel. Comment down below. Follow me on Twitch. Follow me on Twitter. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay cool. Stay righteous. Stay safe. Peace.
Family.